If you could say and spell your first and last and title.
Sure. First name is Tung, T-U-N-G. Last name is Yin, Y-I-N, and I'm a law professor at Lewis and Clark Law School.
So, assuming you read both the original AG's letter as well as Kotek's response, the first thing I want to just kind of establish is what the legal arguments are on both sides here.
Okay, so to start with, immigration law is exclusively federal in nature. So the Congress gets to make the rules about who can come into the country and under what conditions and so on. And the states have basically no role in terms of either trying to be more lenient or more restrictive on immigration. So obviously we have some states that might prefer to allow more people to immigrate, and there might be others who would actually prefer to keep even more people out than we do currently. But the Constitution pretty much guarantees this exclusively to Congress. So that's the starting point. So Congress has created all these immigration laws and rules and so forth. Now, the particular question here is, to what extent can the federal government count on the states to help carry out the federal view of how immigration law should be enforced? Um, and so the line here we have to draw is between taking actions to interfere with the federal government versus not taking any actions to help the federal government. And that's sort of where the dividing line is. And so we have these sanctuary states and sanctuary cities that have created policies to say that, well, we're not going to tell ICE when somebody who's in custody is going to be released from custody. Now, typically, ICE will say, hey, you know what, when you have people who are undocumented in state custody and they're going to be released, let us know before you release them. That way, ICE would like to go pick them up so that we can then process them for removal hearings, deportation. So the state can say, okay, we'll give you notice, or the state can say, no, we're not going to give you notice. The argument by the federal government is that actions like that are obstructing or interfering with the federal government. And the states and cities, I think, take the view that no, we're not obstructing you. We're just not lifting a finger to help you.
And then when it comes to the actions that are threatened here, I mean, it is vague, right? But in her Twitter post or X post, the Attorney General did say, well, if you don't comply, we'll see you in court. So assuming she's threatening some kind of legal action here, what might that look like? And would it be unprecedented?
Um, I mean, it's hard to like come up with all the things that the administration might come up and do, but I think let's take an easy case. This happened I can't remember if it was in Chicago recently, and it happened previously in Boston. But let's say that there's some sort of court proceeding in state court, and one of the parties is possibly undocumented. ICE is interested in picking them up, and they show up at the courthouse to be able to grab the person when they step out of court. Now, if anybody involved with the state actually takes action to help that person escape from ICE through, back doors or whatever, that actually looks like it could be. I'm not saying it is, because obviously it would depend on the facts, but it could be obstructing federal agents. Because if the state official didn't do anything, then the person would come out and be taken into custody by ICE. So that we see there's an affirmative act that the state official has done with the seeming intent to thwart the federal agents. So if that's what's at issue, we have seen, not commonly, but it has happened in the Trump administration that state officials in those circumstances have been arrested and charged with obstruction type crimes. That's fairly aggressive use of federal criminal law, but at least it sort of fits within the letter of the criminal statutes. So that's what Attorney General Bondi has in mind to say that, hey, you better not lift a single finger to get in the way of ICE agents, because if you do, we're going to do everything we can to prosecute. then that would be criminal lawsuit. It would be indictments and criminal prosecution. But if what Bondi is wanting to say is, hey, we don't have enough ICE agents to go do all of the removals we'd like to do, so we actually are expecting you, the states and the local police, to help us in rounding up undocumented people. And if you don't, then we're going to take action against you. There's a line of Supreme Court cases that says that the federal government cannot commandeer, that's the word that the court uses, they cannot commandeer the states. And the idea is that we have a federal government, we have a state government, they each do their own thing, and the voters should know who is responsible for what. And immigration, again, is the responsibility of the federal government. So once the federal government starts co-opting the states to help it out, the voters get confused. Like if we're unhappy, we don't know who to blame. Do we blame the state? Do we blame the federal government? If we blame the state officials are going to say, well, we had no choice. We were forced to by the federal government. And if the voters blame the federal government says, no, the states did this to you. So that's why the Supreme Court says, no, 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 you can't commandeer the states. And so that's, again, why I think this distinction between taking any specific action to interfere versus we're not going to do anything to help you. We're not going to get in your way, but it's all your responsibility.
It brings up an interesting point here, a little off topic, but when you're talking about the federal government cannot commandeer, does that apply in the situation where Trump sort of took over the police department in DC?
That's special because DC is entirely a creation of federal law. There's the Constitution says the seat of the government will be in a federal district, and Congress then created the District of Columbia. And so, in many ways, DC is the equivalent of a state, except that all of its laws are still passed as through the federal entity in that sense. And so there is a specific law that I think it's 30 days is the basic limit for the president to be able to do something like what he's doing.
Then in this case, obviously there's mention of the 10th Amendment in Kotek's response there. Can you explain what she's claiming? I mean, I think you kind of already did, but can you associate those things?
Yeah, so the 10th Amendment says that any powers that are not specifically given to the federal government are left for the states or the people. And so the idea, again, is the federal government has very specific enumerated listed powers. Now, through the way that it's all been interpreted, the powers it has have become very immense and powerful. So the federal government has uh, can regulate many aspects of our lives. But the idea is that for any federal legislation to be valid, Congress has to be able to, if forced in court to justify it, be able to say, well, this is what the Constitution allows us to do. And so if you can't find a power like that, then that means that it belongs to the states or to the people, with these referendums and stuff. So I think what Governor Kotek is arguing essentially is that, yeah, you federal government have your power to enforce immigration law, but that's on you to enforce, and everything else is left to us, including whether we want to help you or not. And in this case, we're not wanting to help you.
If the Attorney General Pam Bondi would like to compel Oregon to somehow turn over this information when somebody is released and other types of information, that would need to be a Supreme Court appeal. And has the Supreme Court ever seen any cases specific to immigration like this?
Well, um, it, it would be a little bit complicated to come up with the sort of the lawsuit to do this, but the ones that the Supreme Court has decided, I mean, this is going to be far more detailed than you need, but I guess to sort of you can distill it however you see fit. So in one case, Congress decided that nuclear waste was a problem. it was being generated, but nobody wanted it because, it's an environmental hazard and so on. And so Congress passed a law that basically said that states have to come up with their own rules for how to handle and regulate nuclear waste. And if they don't, then the states are forced to take title to it. And if they take title to it, then they're responsible for all the environmental damage and so forth that this nuclear waste can cause. So the Supreme Court said, no, you can't do that because that's commandeering. Congress, you can come up with your own rules to regulate nuclear waste, but you can't force states to make the rules themselves. And so the way that lawsuit came up is that Congress passed that particular law and the states sued, and that's how it got up to the Supreme Court. There's another case where to enforce the Brady Bill about background checks for handgun purchases, Congress said, well, okay, yeah, anybody who wants to buy a gun has to go through a background check. ATF can do them, but ATF is kind of backed up. So, you know what, local sheriffs, you have to do them too. But there was no money provided for it. It basically just, again, commandeered the local sheriffs to do so. And again, the local sheriffs thought, well, we don't want to do this. And so they sued to block the enforcement of that particular rule on them. So based on those two examples, I think what we might predict is if the Attorney General were to try to force Oregon to cooperate, what would that look like? It would be hard to come up with a lawsuit. Now, if she, Bondi, were able to get Congress to pass a law to force the states to cooperate, then we would see most likely the states would sue to block the enforcement of that bill, and then that ultimately could get to the Supreme Court.
It couldn't go the way of the Attorney General suing based on Oregon's already passed sanctuary laws.
I mean, I guess she maybe could argue that that somehow violates federal law, but I mean, that's to me a pretty weak argument bordering on frivolous. Uh, I mean, from what we've seen with the way this administration works, I mean, I kind of hesitate to give ideas, but I figured, this is obviously the way they operate. Far more likely, it seems, would be for the president to try to force cooperation by threatening to cut off money, which is how the
It's already
president has
happening.
gotten right with the law firms and the elite universities and so on. Some have fought, but others have said, okay, we'll cooperate with you. Don't cut off our money stream. And so, that seems to be the particular way in which this administration operates. So, if Trump comes along and says, hey, you know what, a state of Oregon, you get a lot of federal money. Unless you agree to cooperate, we're going to cut it off like that. Again, it's not clear the president can do that. Um, there, there are conditions that can be attached to spending, but it's not a complete free-for-all according to the Supreme Court. So again, if the president tried that and it was, if you don't cooperate with us on immigration, you lose all federal funding, I'm sure the state will sue on that and argue that that's
Yeah,
uh,
they
not
just
valid.
did with Rayfield's. I mean, at least with the VOCA funding that Rayfield just sued on yesterday. So
Okay.
some of that's already ongoing, but